we'll have to discuss with Ben because about this. Yeah, and we will have to deal with the spatial and temporal constraints and dimension of the conference. Because I'm really interested. I'm going to try not to move around, although I like moving around usually. Temporal try to stick with time. So as I realized that my paper was way too long, I'm going to try to go over it quickly without reading necessarily that much in order to be able to put emphasis on certain aspects. And especially since Rebecca and Ben yesterday made a very good introduction of certain things. This is about moving from the civilizing mission to the capitalist market. So that's it. So I would like to focus now on this morning, and what I would say is the economy still. Besides those terms, educational globalization, we have modern educational modernization that we will hear about at the end of the 19th century. There is also commodification of education. There are certain micromechanics of all those things that take place. And I'm interested more in seeing the civilizing mission discourse as a kind of discourse that allows lots of actors to present their point of view and try to play for money, basically. Because, well, no, most of us know, and we should say that to students who want to think about academia. Academia needs money. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over, first, try to show how the market gets set up. Okay. In a certain sense, also focus less on the supply aspect of the educational market, because that has been done quite well by quite a few books and authors. I try to see the interplay with the social demand, the demand aspect of what's going on. Then see how the market functions, in some sense. How does it work? And with a particular emphasis on buildings and timetables of the schools. My example, hopefully, it would be physical education. As you know, I would have chosen. I was hesitating between languages and physical education. I said, okay, let's go for physical education. It's nice. And then starts towards the end, see the untoward consequences. And there I will even do something that I usually, my students know that quite well, I hate to do, but even throw the random Foucauldian concept out there. All right, so so a few photos to start with. How does that come? Well, over the last 8 years, I've been having lots of fun with Ben and the others about education. We're going through a certain number of archives, and when we arrive to all those archives about material, we find lots of things, and you find, of course, lots of photos. You find also lots of numbers. Most people are rarely interested with the numbers, more interested with the photos. I understand it. But you do find those type of pictures in the archives of the different educational actors. And not only, and also for diplomatic actors and other actors. So you see everything, as I said, that you see, for example, school buildings, you see the school actors, you see more school buildings, and how they are placed. Keep this in mind, I'll come back to them. And then you see students, and students presented in different manners. First one, this is from Athens, the other one's from Alexandria, the previous ones were from Rhodes or Salonika, etc., etc. To the left is from France, the French educational actors, the right is from Italians, and so on. Now, what does that do for us, I would like to say? It has to do, of course, with the arrival of educational actors, and especially Catholic educational actors towards the end of the 19th century, in the second half of the 19th century in the Eastern Mediterranean. First, there are three reasons why this arrival takes place. Of course, there's the geopolitical reason. I talked about it yesterday. The transformation of the Ottoman Empire and the opening up our empire to foreign educational actors allows for the arrival and installation in the region. The second aspect has to do also with the transformation that takes place in Western societies. And we can forget a little bit about it, but what happens in the 19th century is a very religious century. Contrary to when you think of the century of secularization, what happens is you have a renewal, a revival of religious activism, and you have a transformation of what we consider as religious work. We think that religious work, it should be more active. So go out to society, try to conquer people, conquer the living through the dead, conquer the healthy through the sick, conquer the men through the women. And in particular, this is very impressive in terms of France, for example, which is one of the main actors we feel. Dr. Rogers had mentioned that in her book, the other books she didn't mention about. By the average age of Catholic clergy in France before the French Revolution is 60 to 65 years old. By about 100 years later, the 1860s and 70s, the average age has dropped to something like 40, 45 years old. And we have 250,000 members of the clergy by 1878. And out of those 250,000, three-quarters are the people who are in the active orders. People who are massively coming out in order to go and work in the society. And and there are lots of women. That's a matter of fact also. Right? Lots and lots of women among those active orders. And if I mention France in particular, because we tend to forget about it, by the end of the 19th century, we always think of those major European powers as being in a fight with the religious actors in their metropolitan space. And so, for example, you have Jules Ferry here to the left, kind of image, eating the clergyman, the clergy spokesman, or Bismarck being on a chess game against the Pope, or and even and then this is British talking, which is different. But interestingly for us, this is only a very metropolitan game, as we know, and also even this metropolitan game sparks the arrival of even more massive numbers of active religious orders in the regions that we're interested in. So, for example, if we take one of the important orders, which are the Brothers of the Christian Schools, the Brothers of the Christian Schools are chased from France by 1904, so they cannot operate in France by 1904. What happens is that they function 845 schools around the world with 190,000 students, because they cannot function in France anymore, so they just go out. And so even this is by the beginning of the 19th century, this is even more important. So these are the aspects, first of all, of this arrival, and it of course has to deal also with this imperial civilizing mission that we mentioned, that we discussed a little bit about. Now, the one thing that is also important to note is that, they mentioned later, in the Eastern Mediterranean, this arrival of the Catholic missionaries is particularly successful, and the establishment of this school is particularly successful. In 1904, the French Foreign Ministry identifies 600 French Catholic missionary schools in the area of what is Ottoman and post-Ottoman states, something between Egypt and the Balkans, with about 100,000 students. And the estimates always stay around those numbers, 80 to 110,000 students. Just a few other numbers. Just the Jesuits, just one of the orders that's active, they operate 190 schools in what is Lebanon, Syria, with about 14,000 students. The Brothers of the Christian Schools I mentioned, they have 57 in the area with them, etc., etc. The numbers are impressive, and even female congregations in particular are very impressive in their presence. Although it was very difficult at the beginning for female congregations to establish themselves in the Eastern Mediterranean for lots of reasons, and only 10% of female Catholic congregations chose to go to that region, so very few. They're still very active, especially towards the end of the 19th century. The Sisters of St. Joseph of Apparition, Sarah Curtis has talked about them, open up 53 of their 59 establishments that open up in that area in the last 25 years, 30 years of the 19th century. Now, all right, this is how these schools arrive massively. What are their missions? Right? What do they do? I mean, why do they get there? I mean, their original idea for most of them was, of course, to come for local Catholics or Eastern Christians, as they mentioned. And they arrived for this, and this explains a little bit also where do you get set up? I mean, you do go somewhere places by accident. You go places where the people exist already. And they mention very often that these people are poor. These people are always corrupt because they've been in contact with either schismatics or Muslims, and so they have to be taken care of, which always creates for lots of tensions, sometimes between local Catholics and those new type of Catholics that arrive, and they're supposed to tell you what modern Christianity is about. And those that explains the initial installation and the initial mission, but that cannot be it. That cannot be the only mission. Of course, people would traditionally think also of what we call proselytism and evangelization. And it is at the beginning one of the missions which fails blatantly. I'll show you, and the numbers show very few people convert, very few people change religion, and this is one of the things that is immediately marked very often by the missionaries and the others, that they don't manage to do that. And as a matter of fact, one of the interesting aspects that happens is that the Catholic Church itself very immediately realizes that in that region they're not producing much, and it's a very interesting aspect in terms of conversions to see, for example, that the Propaganda Fide, which is the congregation responsible in Rome for everything that is missions, and it's a highly centralized bureaucratic organization that functions quite well, that sends out every year a document saying, you have to tell us, give us numbers, what you did, etc., etc. What buildings do you have? What costs do you have? What debts have you contracted? How many people you have? How many people you have converted, etc., etc. This is an example of one of those things. Immediately realizes that in the Eastern Mediterranean, nothing much happens. Not real conversion. So you see the numbers. Sometimes they have 1, 0, 0. Which contrasts, of course, when they get numbers from Africa or I don't know, like in somewhere in the Pacific, or also or in Asia, where people write 10,000, 100,000. Of course, that's not very real either. But yeah, that's the one. Let's go back to the Eastern Mediterranean. The last mission, or untoward mission, is that of course, the schools are the tool of cultural diplomacy of the foreign powers present in the region, or interested in the region. Ever since the capitulations that exist between the Ottoman Empire and foreign European imperial powers, there's a kind of separation also of zones of influence in a certain sense. For example, Austria-Hungary. Yeah. Austria-Hungary is, for example, responsible for that region. France has the protectorate it is responsible for most of the other region. Now, those zones of influence of the empires are present there until the end of the 19th century, when they start being contested by newcomers, and in particular Italy, which starts challenging the French on the islands and even on the coastline, and also challenges Austria-Hungary and the northern Balkans and the countries. And even Germany tries to show up and contest that. And what that means is that they're pouring in money and they're pouring in resources in order to open up their own schools or school-supported network. This is how, as a matter of fact, the market a little bit gets set up. Now, so we have French Catholic, Italian Catholic schools, Hungarian Catholic schools, German Catholic schools, etc., and lots of others as well. Also Protestant, almost the same nationalities, plus Liberation, the Americans, and then Russia. Because one of the things I forgot to mention is that this is pretty much the most we get out of a free market environment, and especially for Catholics. Catholics cannot go normally open up a mission anywhere they want. You have to have the approval of the propaganda that sends you somewhere as an order. And normally gives you the monopoly of the place where you are. So no other religious order can come and open up, another Catholic religious order can come and open up a school over there. This is called the commission model. This model does not function in the Ottoman Empire and in the region. It's the only, almost it's one of the few regions in the world where the propaganda accepts that more than one congregation or order can go and function in the same place. And it has to do with a specific religious symbolism of the region. I mean, you cannot give the monopoly of the Holy Lands to just one order. Everybody else is going to kill you. So that's what they do, and that's what happens, and that's why you have this free market environment. Now, what these schools also now try to, the other aspect that I should mention about these schools and their mission is that they try to deal with is they try now to also to bring the local societies into the Western world and like if you want Western civilization. And this is where the demand aspect is going to get it immediately. The schools are an element of integration of local societies and social mobility at this end of the 19th century. It happens in the rural world, and we do have elements of rural society, of rural communities, writing letters asking for schools to open up in their villages, but it's a mostly urban phenomenon. It's a mostly urban phenomenon that the schools and the foreign powers have to cater for. And this is a very interesting photo. For example, it's the King and Queen of Italy that go with roads to present even gifts to poor children and to show how attached they are to the school. So it's a mostly urban phenomenon, and most buildings open up in cities. And I will come back to why this happens. If I give you just an example, once again, the Sisters of St. Joseph of the Sisters of St. Joseph opened, for example, up in Patras in 1894, in Piraeus, and this is their school, in 1895, in Volos in 1905, in Candia and in Salonika 2 years later. The Brothers of the Christian Schools opened in Salonika in 1888, in Rhodes in 1889, in Piraeus in 1893, and of course they are already in Constantinople, Alexandria, and Smyrna. Yeah. Now, why do they have a certain success? Well, one of the reasons that they have success, I would say, has to deal with one of the reasons that they have success, all these schools, is that they provide something that, for example, public education cannot provide locally to those emerging urban strata and of local societies. And who could blame them? It's not by accident that you have this empty corridor over here and this big building appearing in the picture, for example. Let me read you something from the Commission about Public Education in Greece in 1880, and you will understand why foreign schools could have a success with the upcoming social needs. We suggest that we adopt the new model of co-education. They are actually not co-education, the post-Lancastrian, how we call it, the monitorial system, actually, of education. And the monitorial system has an advantage as a system, and it would be good to be introduced in the primary schools of Greece, but under one condition: that the number of students working with one professor, with one teacher, should not exceed 80. Now, 80. 80 for one teacher is already, it's good. But I mean, imagine that probably some classes had more than 80 students. And then you can understand why some of the urban strata of the society didn't want to go to public schools. They didn't want to be with 80 students. Moreover, education in many cases, for example in Greece, not in other countries, was co-educational. And people didn't want to send their girls to those co-educational schools, public schools. The other aspect was that these schools were seen as a better way of opening up to foreign languages and learning foreign languages. And so being attached, being integrated into these global networks that were coming up. And of course, for female students and for the families, it was very important to send them there. Rebecca has written about it. It's about the model of the maîtresse de maison that is very popular for the families, and they want to send their daughters to learn how to become the perfect maîtresse de maison in those French schools. It's at that point, by the end of the 19th century, that supply and demand get interlocked. Missionaries open up schools, and the local societies see the interest in these schools, and more ask for opening up of new schools in order to be able to send their children there. Now, and this is where the school becomes the victim of its success. Because if you're opening up and you're doing all those buildings, you have to think that you need the money to do it. And who pays for it? This is the important question. Who's going to pay for all those new buildings, for all those opening up? Of course, the original idea, and there is people paying for it. And here I present you the original idea would have been, actually I should put it there, skip it, sorry. I mean, the idea would be that the local Catholics would pay for it, but that immediately comes up as being unrealistic. Local Catholics are mostly poor, and very often local Catholics cannot pay. On the contrary, very often local Catholics are the bursaries of the schools because they are needed. They need to have them. An example from Piraeus, once again, only 13 students out of 150 pay in Piraeus in 1888. But in Athens, right next, a school from the same network of St. Joseph of Piraeus, 160 of the 250 pay. And Piraeus, there are more Catholic students going to the school, and the other one, they're taking more non-Catholic students who are paying. And it's the same thing all over the place. In Salonika, the opening up of schools that have to deal with that have to deal with both a paying audience, families, and then also a non-paying audience, very often the local Catholics. And this brings a stratification of education. I should have gone back there, because this is from Salonika, before I move to the propaganda. In 1902, there's a very interesting scandal that takes place in Salonika. The brothers of the Christian schools open up this new building, which is supposed to be a pensionnat for girls of good families that pay. But right next to it, there's also a primary school with the local poor Catholics. And there's a scandal because both the French consul and the head of the board of paying parents, the Association of Parents, protest because they don't want their children to be with the children of the local poor families, Catholic families. And the brothers of the Christian schools are forced to separate the two schools. To keep the one school, the pensionnat, for the paying, and to maintain a lower standard primary school for the poor Catholics right next to the church. So you can even see the spatial dimension. The new school opens up somewhere else in the city. It's actually on Bank Street that it opens up, while the old primary school remains by the church. And there are lots of interesting, we have the testimony that they are protested by the families about this, that they don't accept this stratification, which is imposed upon them. And even the missionaries don't accept it that easily. But they have to deal with it because, as I mentioned, they have to deal with the funding issue. Now, not all of them, I mean, the brothers of Christian schools always said that this was very traumatic for them as an experience, and then they were very happy when they managed to reunite the schools again in the 1930s. Not all of them are like that. Another provincial from some other region in Lesbos says, for example, "Oh, I'm forced to take 15 Catholics out of 45 students this year, which means that the number of paying students will be reduced to only 30. So please send me subsidies also. This is this is what it's supposed to be." Now, so what you need then is your dependent or organized, more and more organized charity. Organized charity that is, it's the Bank of the Missions, as we call it, l'œuvre de la propagation de la foi, which is based at Lyon, and they are the ones who send money to the different missions. Every year they get the same thing. They get a report from every mission with expenses. You have there numbers of students, you have number of costs, you have what they need for building buildings, and they decide to send money. And they're bankers. If they're Lyon bankers, at its best. I mean, they're hardly like rationalistic about they do that. So they say, no, we're not giving you anything because you're not producing anything. This mission needs, we should be shutting down. So they're like, it's like a multinational corporation. They're like shutting down and saying that we're not sending money there and there or elsewhere. But even that, and that explains to you also all those images that you saw before. Because how does it function? This association has a magazine, has a periodical that goes out to the people that have contributed money to the association. And for that periodical, they need articles and pictures. So they ask the different schools to send them pictures, and they send them little blurbs that they put on their periodical. And that's how they manage to attract people and also persuade people that it's good to give money for them. Um, I'll skip on because that was about the puissance, as a matter of fact, after so I'm running out of time. Yeah, no. Yeah, 5 minutes. Okay. And I wanted to say, I said that because it was going to be late. I'm gonna, no, I'm got it short. Constraints of time and space. Um, the the main actor or the main paying and financial revenue for schools by the end of the 19th century is the non-Catholic paying students. It's the non-Catholic state students who accept to pay because they want to come to get this better education, but that forces then all those schools, and I was getting to that about the functioning of the market, that forces the schools themselves to adapt to the order, to adapt to the demand. You have here a very good example. It's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Italy that is asking all the Italian schools abroad in 1895 to accept, for example, to teach foreign languages, to teach not only Italian. And they say, you also should be teaching Arabic, Turkish, Greek, Albanese, American, whatever is needed to keep the clients happy. So we're okay if we're not dealing only with Italian. And that happens more and more. More and more of these things happen. The French schools mentioned that they are teaching English because people didn't want it. One of them says, we were forced to hire 2 Greek professors this year because the families wanted it, but that requires a cost, etc., etc. And so you're getting into this educational bubble that actually gets you. You provide more and more, and the timetables become more and more important. All right, quickly about physical education, because I had promised I was going to do a little bit about physical education, and this I didn't do it. By the 1880s, physical education was not very popular. People didn't want to do physical education was not in the curricula, and especially in the Ottoman Empire, it was very badly seen either by millet actors. I have here the Orthodox actors from the Patriarchate, which is the great school of the nation, as it's called in Istanbul. But even Ottoman officials didn't really like physical education. And kind of fact, there were certain types of it. But it was becoming introduced more and more by different means. In the Greek educational system is introduced, and there are 4 hours per 3 to 4 hours per day in the timetable of a student by the 1890s, and it's the type also of physical education that is becoming important, and it's also private initiatives that existed, and it's the type of physical education. Because of course, when you introduce physical education in the timetable, you have to think about where are they going to do it. In the great school of the nation, they were going up and down the stairs. That was physical education for them up there. They were going up and down stairs. But more and more, now that physical education is there, that's where you get a little technological revolution in it. More and more, what happens is as physical education becomes important because of 3 things that conflate: the medical discourse, hygiene of the body; political discourse, building the citizen soldier; but also a kind of educational discourse. More and more people complain that the students cannot stay 7 hours at school without doing something. They have to get them out to work, which means that they have to introduce it in the timetable. And by introducing it in the timetable, what happens is that the timetable becomes even more complicated to deal with and requires also an adaptation of the buildings. For example, I'm reading you the timetable of many Orthodox schools and also Greek schools and also missionary schools of the end of the 19th century. So this is a 6-hour, 6-day week, 8 to 12 in the morning, 2 to 4 in the afternoon. And physical education takes place between 11 and 12, so at the end of the morning, and between 3 and 4 in the afternoon, very often. Except for the winter, the second semester, which is more about the summer, where they ask them to move physical education in the morning, early in the morning, or late in the day, so that they don't have the heat to deal with. But if the physical education is outside, well, then what you need at the same time is new spaces. You cannot have these schools, and I was going to ask you, that are in the center of the city, and that in the center of the city they don't have the space. So they have to build these new schools. And there you have extracts, for example, of those building projects that exist in different missionaries, and then you have the realization of it. And as you can see, and now I'm getting back to those images, now you understand why many of them are built outside of what was the old center of the city, because they needed this new space according to the new pedagogical model and also their new timetable. More and more. And the students will be presented like this. Now, one thing about it also that you don't see, you will remark that, and we remark that in many of the pictures, the physical education the students do is a very ordered one. Yes, I'm done, 30 minutes. Yep. It's a very ordered one. You rarely have them see them do athletics. What you see them do is ordered exercises, because people were still very afraid of that athletic aspect of physical education. I'll get back to it in 7 minutes. But I have, because I have to finish. Now finish with it. I'm just finishing this. So as I said, modern. Some of you have seen this. Modern was BCBG about education. That's what I mentioned about ordered one. Modern was cool because it was a new type of modern education that included new buildings that were very different. You covered buildings also in the courtyard outside, because if you're doing physical education in the winter, you don't want to be rained upon. That's just like one of those things. And modern was, of course, supposed to be cosmopolitan. This had also untoward effects, and I'm concluding there. The untoward effects that it had is that the French-Italian competition that takes place all around this and all of the French territory, first of all, leads to an American success. By the 1920s, the end of the period, it's the American schools that actually emerge triumphant. And I gave you a good example, Anatolia College moving to Thessaloniki, for reasons that I can go into to explain. The French and Italian mostly going to decline, and you have the example here. But you're going to be studying this. This was the new French school of the end of the 19th century. The bottom picture that everybody was looking as one of the best schools in the Eastern Mediterranean in Rhodes, and this is what's happening to it today. For at least 8 years ago, when we were there in Rhodes, it's being destroyed to become a new commercial center. Public state reaction. To give just the example of Greece, because I have run out of time and abused it. This public state does move in and creates new schools itself and new buildings. Between 1928 and 1932, the Greek state built 3,167 primary schools in 4 years. It had built 1,474 in the previous 100 years. So it built 2.5 times more in 4 years, and had built over 100 years. As a reaction to all this, of the need to regulate the market, because of that effervescence of the educational market that was taking place. And they asked some of their best architects to build some of them in order to have this very modern approach of it. You have two very good examples here. Chionis and Karantinos were very famous modernist architects, and the schools are still there today, and you can see how they're supposed to be out there in the space and opening up. Finally, and ended up, because the market was now regulated, they still had to create a place where elites could send their kids. And they created two new types of schools in extent. Some that were state-sponsored or state-sponsored schools that could allow for, that's my faculty moment, I meant there, for a heterotopia. A school that was supposed to be there, but was not supposed to be of that society. A school that was supposed to be American while in Greece, or French while in Greece, and give an image of that other part of like France or America while in Greece, and where most of our prime ministers have gone. And thank you, and such a